And welcome back, listeners. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Invisible Threat Podcast. And as is normal, I am joined by my esteemed co-host, plural now, Dr. Matt and Joanne Eby, also co-authors of the Invisible Threat book, which if you have not read that yet, if you haven't gotten your copy, Amazon, go get it. Worth the price of admission, I promise you. So, and maybe, Matt, we can throw out a little offer here, a signed autograph version for the two of them. Maybe we'll throw out some sort of promo at some point in the future. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. We've done that in the past for people that we've had dinner with over the years and things. And so, absolutely, a signed copy. We're honored to do that. And if we see people at conferences, and we normally will bring a copy or two with us, but that doesn't stop it. If people would like something and we see them, they just have to give us their business card and address, and we would certainly sign a copy and send it to them.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, you guys are back in the Kansas City home, right? I know that you're transitioning back and forth between your new Vegas digs and Kansas City. How's the weather treating you, Joanne?
It's been a pleasant June here in Kansas. Very nice. And not too buggy, not too humid. It's lovely.
Well, hey, I really kind of want to jump into this. I'm really excited, especially after last week's podcast and kind of sort of how we left everybody on the edge. I know that I couldn't wait to do this recording because I want to get deep into it. So again, welcome back to the Invisible Threat. Thank you, listeners, for joining us. And as mentioned, we really introduced a pretty uncomfortable idea, right? We suggested that fiduciary risk may not be the result of a failed control. We love controlling things. It may not be the result of a failed policy or even the result of a failed outcome. Instead, fiduciary risk may be the risk that the exercise of fiduciary discretion becomes distorted, right? So, Matt, is that where we left things off?
Yeah, I think that's right, Carter. And if what you said is true, I think it raises a much bigger question.
Okay, well, I'm on the edge of my seat like I was in the last one. What would that be?
Yeah, and I think the audience is as well, for people who understand this and are experts in it. If discretion is the central activity of the fiduciary profession, and I think most professionals agree, why have we spent so little time actually studying discretion?
That's interesting because it feels like discretion is everywhere, right? It's distracting me right now, right? Discretionary distributions, discretionary trust, huge fan. Discretion over acceptance, discretionary authority, right? Committee decisions, trustee interpretation, which is always an interesting one. And then we're constantly talking, about discretion, right, Joanne?
We are, but talking about something and studying something are not necessarily the same thing.
Okay, well, can you be a little bit more specific? Like, what do you mean?
So, most fiduciaries spend their careers exercising discretion, managing discretion, documenting discretion, defending discretion. So many meetings, and people are saying, oh, we have to make a decision, and we have to exercise discretion and use our judgment. And so there's a lot of talk in the industry, and I've been in the industry, for decades, and so much conversation, good conversation goes on, but that doesn't necessarily mean that as an industry, we have developed a deep understanding of how discretion itself works.
All right, so let me push on that for just a little bit here, because I think a lot of listeners, to your point, might hear that and say, whoa, hold on, wait a second. I've been exercising discretion for 20, 30, however many years. Or I sit on a fiduciary committee every month. Or I review discretionary distributions every week. How can you say we don't understand discretion?
Participating in something and understanding something are not necessarily the same thing. They can be the same thing, but they're not necessarily the same thing. Take cars. People drive cars every day. That doesn't mean they understand how an engine works, how an automobile works. People use computers every day. That doesn't mean they understand how software works or why suddenly their computer stops. They usually just like, oh, what am I going to do? I'm just going to turn everything off, turn it on again, and hope for the best. I mean, just because they use it doesn't mean that they fully understand it. And fiduciaries exercise discretion every day. It doesn't mean that as an industry, we have studied how discretion itself operates.
Yeah, so not necessarily. And that's interesting because you're not saying fiduciaries are bad at discretion. You're saying we've never really stopped to truly examine it.
Exactly. And just as a side note, it was one of when Matt was working on his dissertation and letting me read some of the drafts of the early chapters that he had, I was blown away because it was like, oh, wow. Like I've never thought of discretion in that way before. And so most fiduciaries, as a practical matter, they are trying to make good decisions and they do make good decisions. They are trying to help beneficiaries, they're trying to help their clients, and they do a good job of that. They're trying to honor the purpose of the trust. And again, like so many great fiduciaries out there doing a wonderful job. And they're trying to balance in the job that they're doing, they are trying to balance competing interests, which is what makes it a challenge. They're trying to manage risk. And that's different, however, from asking, how is discretion actually being exercised? What influences it? What improves it? What distorts it?
Yeah, so maybe discretion is a little bit like breathing, right? We all do it, but we don't spend much time studying it. It just happens.
Carter, that's a pretty good analogy. Discretion is so embedded in fiduciary practice that most people in the industry don't stop to examine it at all. They simply just do it. They learn from the person who used to do it before them or the person that taught them how to do their job. And just because we do it, we often assume we understand it.
Yeah, it's kind of like what you were talking about before, right? It's like follow the leader. We're just following what has been done previously, and it's working this way, so we'll just keep following the leader. But your industry research suggests maybe we don't.
Well, at least not as well as we might think. And that was one of the biggest surprises when I started doing my research. I assumed somebody had already studied this. I assumed there would be decades of fiduciary specific research explaining how professional fiduciaries exercise discretionary authority. I assumed there would be accepted models, accepted frameworks, accepted terminology. I assumed the answers already existed.
And they didn't, is what I will assume.
Not in the way that I expected, not in the way they exist in some other professions, such as the medical and the judicial professions. Lawyers and judges have a lot of reference material that there is available to them in the way to explain how to come to the decisions they make. In our industry, there isn't much in the way of published research in our industry, but I did find legal literature. I found regulatory guidance from the OCC and other regulators. I found practitioner commentary, risk management literature, ethics literature, and I found research on discretion in law. I found research and discretion in medicine, but far less fiduciary specific research than I expected, especially around the actual exercise of discretion.
Why do you think that is?
I think part of the answer is that the industry is incredibly good at sharing knowledge between practitioners and between organizations.
Yeah, that's true, Matt. The fiduciary profession has always learned from experienced practitioners. We learn from one another. We attend conferences, we attend training programs, We participate in roundtables and panels. We network well. We compare experiences and we discuss difficult situations. We share approaches.
Yeah, which obviously, I mean, that all sounds like a good thing, right?
Well, no question, it is a good thing, and it's what helps a fiduciary become better and better. And they will lean into that. They will have their own networks. It's extremely valuable for the industry.
All that's true, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that knowledge sharing and knowledge creation are not the same thing.
You go a little bit deeper if you don't mind. Explain that.
Knowledge sharing usually starts with a question like this: when you see this issue, what are you doing to resolve it? How are you handling it? What are others seeing? What approaches seem to be working for the organizations that have that particular issue? And those are valuable questions. That's what you hear and you see in conferences or roundtables, etc. But they are fundamentally different from research type questions.
How so, if you don't mind going a little bit deeper?
Well, research questions ask, what can we discover? What is actually happening underneath the practice? What assumptions are shaping behavior? What patterns exist that we haven't recognized yet? What don't we know?
We don't know. We don't know. All right. So those are very different approaches, right? One is about experience. The other one is all about discovery.
Yeah, that's exactly right. One asks, what are people doing? The other asks, what is actually happening? And that's such an important distinction because organizations are often very good at documenting what they expect fiduciaries to do. They're not always good at understanding what fiduciaries actually do when they encounter ambiguity.
Ambiguity is where discretion truly lives. If the answer is obvious, discretion isn't really required. If the governing document clearly indicates the outcome, discretion is not there. If policy determines the answer, discretion isn't really required. Discretion becomes important in situations where reasonable people can actually disagree and where somebody could look at that disagreement and go, well, neither party is wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Matt, that sounds familiar from episode 2, right? For those of you who've been listening for almost 4 months now. Awesome.
Yeah, and it should. That's exactly where we located fiduciary risk in a very recent episode. Fiduciary risk begins where discretion begins, and discretion begins where certainty ends. We're talking about ambiguity, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. Ambiguity. So, well, give me an example of that if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's perfect, right? Because we've been talking about AI. Let's use it as an example because, as we're saying, everybody is talking about this right now, but let's bring it directly into the fiduciary industry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everybody's an understatement. So fair enough. Every conference I attend seems to have AI sessions. Literally, it doesn't matter in the financial services that I've been in for 25 years almost. Everybody's talking AI, right? Every publication has AI articles. Every institution seems to be discussing AI, marketing, branding, all of it. It's all about AI all day.
That's true. And most of those conversations are entirely appropriate. People want to know what's available, what vendors exist, what regulators are saying about it, what policies might need to be written, what controls might need to be implemented. Those are all reasonable questions when it comes to AI.
Yeah, right. And I mean, and practical questions as well, right?
Very practical. Organizations have to make decisions now. However, they can't wait forever.
But that's exactly why I think AI is such a useful example because most of the current conversation is focused on adoption, which AI firm, which, platform, etc. How do we use it? How do we control it? How do we govern it? How do we implement it? Those are knowledge sharing questions. But there are deeper questions underneath them, questions that we don't yet fully understand, questions that require investigation rather than adoption, questions that require research rather than experience sharing. And that's where the conversation starts to really become interesting.
I'm going to test this a little bit. If an institution says, we're trying to figure out how to use AI in trust administration, for example. Currently, the industry might gather experienced people and ask, well, what AI tools are people using or thinking about using? Or what risk have they identified? Has the board and fiduciary committee approved? Right? What policies have they written? What controls have they implemented? What vendors are they considering? Do they have regulatory or regulator buy-in?
Exactly, Carter. That's what we said before, right? Those are all sharing and experience questions, and they're very useful. But notice the basis of the questions, as I said. They are helping us understand what other people are already doing. That's knowledge sharing. Research asks very different questions.
Yeah, well, I can imagine that research does. So what is it that research is asking then?
Well, it asks, what can we discover?
And that's a very different conversation.
Research might ask, where does AI actually intersect with the exercise of fiduciary discretion? Which fiduciary activities are appropriate for AI assistance? And which fiduciary activities need to remain under human discretionary authority and why? How does AI influence the fiduciary's interpretation of the facts of the trust? Does AI improve discretionary decision making or merely accelerate it? Does AI make fiduciaries more reflective or more dependent? And what evidence is there of that conclusion? How does AI affect committee deliberation? How should AI be governed when it participates in a significant fiduciary activity? Notice that this is a different level of inquiry.
Yeah, because now you're not researching AI. You're researching discretion under the guise or application of AI.
Exactly. The technology becomes secondary. The real question is what happens to fiduciary discretion when this new technology enters into the process?
And Carter, that's a question we don't fully know the answer to yet.
When I started thinking about AI and sidebar here, I saw this documentary being promoted on AI and a lot of these AI contributors. The more we talk about this, the less this feels like an AI discussion, though.
Because it really isn't an AI discussion. AI is just the example within the context of fiduciary discretion. AI simply just exposes the gap that we really don't understand fiduciary discretion in its essence.
Okay, so then what gap is it that we're really trying to talk about here then?
The gap, as I just mentioned, between what we assume we know and what we've actually studied. The gap between the practice of fiduciary discretion and the true understanding of how does fiduciary discretion behave in under ambiguity. The gap between experience and knowledge. And maybe that's the real issue. The fiduciary profession contains extraordinary experience. The question is whether we've converted enough of that experience into true knowledge.
Because at the end of the day, experience stays with the individual. Knowledge becomes available to the profession as a whole, to the AI technology platforms, if that knowledge was out there and if it was published. And those are not the same thing.
No, no, they're really not. And that's really a powerful distinction. Experience stays with the individual. Knowledge belongs to the profession and ultimately becomes available for mass consumption.
No truer words, Carter. Very well said. And if discretion truly sits at the center of fiduciary work, then understanding discretion may be one of the most important knowledge requirements facing the profession.
Yeah, so maybe the issue isn't that the industry lacks individual expertise. Maybe the issue is that we spent decades upon decades in practice without exerting the same effort in studying, right, researching some of our most important assumptions.
And I think that you would call that the invisible threat. I think that's exactly the question. How much do we actually know about how fiduciaries exercise discretion? How much do we know about what improves it? How much do we know about what distorts it? How much do we know about how institutions influence it? And how much of what we think we know has never actually been researched and documented?
Because with AI, especially, the environment is changing. The technology is changing, but also just in the trust industry in general, with such a big wealth transfer taking place, families are changing, beneficiary expectations are changing, the profession itself is changing, which means that inherited knowledge may not match what is needed today in the industry.
Yeah, and just thinking about that, and maybe that's where we'll leave our listeners today, right? Maybe. I think we will. If discretion sits at the center of fiduciary work, how much do we really understand it?
A great place to leave them. That's exactly the question.
Yeah, so today we introduced a different kind of risk, not fiduciary risk or knowledge risk, right? The possibility that the profession may be relying on assumptions about discretion that have never actually been studied or researched. And if that's true, then perhaps the next stage of fiduciary evolution isn't better policies or better procedures or better controls. Perhaps it's a better understanding of discretion itself. We'll see you next time on The Invisible Threat. Most organizations move past these moments. We don't. Dr. Matt, Joanne, thank you again for leaving our listeners on edge. And listeners, thank you again for listening to another wonderful episode of the Invisible Threat Podcast. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Podbean, whatever that might be. We really do appreciate you coming here every week to listen to this. And Dr. Matt, Joanne, thank you as always of being amazing co-hosts with me on here.
Carter, it's always a great time. We always look forward to it. And hopefully, as you're saying, the listeners are on the edge of their seat.
Well, I know I am every week whenever I get in here. So for my esteemed co-host, Dr. Matt and Joanne Eby, I'm Carter Wilcoxson, CEO and founder of Epic Services Company. Thanking you again for joining us, and make sure to see us, and we will see you next time on the Invisible Threat Podcast. Thank you, everybody.